All right, so Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, everybody. Hope you and your loved ones are enjoying the day, which so far has been a relatively slow news cycle. So I've been going back and looking at headlines and stories from the past week, which I find are particularly interesting or particularly important. And I keep circling back to two major topics that we've discussed in some previous videos. The first one being the 814-page George R.R. Martin tier doorstopper tome that is the January 6th Select Committee's final report. That's one. It's huge, right? Where they, formally recommended charges against a former president. They made a bunch of recommendations for what Congress and the American people and various civic institutions should do differently to prevent something like January 6th from happening again, as well as just compiling all the evidence in a kind of cohesive form. But it's 814 pages. It's a lot. So I've been, skimming that, reading some of the takeaways and the commentary from various political journalists. And then the second major story, of course, is that $1.7 trillion federal spending bill, the omnibus bill, which is primarily designed to fund the federal government through September 2023, but also provides like billions of dollars of additional defense for Ukraine, as well as other things. And there's actually one area in which both of these, well, one's a piece of legislation, the omnibus bill, and the other one's just a really big final report of an investigation. But there's at least one area in which both of these documents coincide, and that is the Electoral Count Reform Act, which we've discussed in some previous videos. That is one of the recommendations of the January 6th Select Committee. Create and pass the Electoral Count Reform Act, and then the Electoral Count Reform Act was included as an amendment in that $1.7 trillion federal spending bill. It passed the Senate, it passed the House, and now it's on its way to President Biden's desk for his signature, which it will undoubtedly get, so it will become law. So I thought we would dive a bit deeper into that particular amendment, that particular recommendation, and see what it entails. So as a bit of a recap, the Electoral Count Act was passed in 1887, right? And it was basically designed to create the procedure and the parameters for how the vice president, who presides over the Senate during the certification of the electoral count votes, how the vice president is supposed to do that, right? And I think most historians and constitutional experts believe that the language is fairly clear, right? Because it basically says the vice president shall open and count the votes, right? It doesn't leave any real ambiguity for, it doesn't say that the vice president, gets to decide which votes to count and which to reject. It's just like open the damn envelope, read what the vote is, note it, and then move on to the next one. But many of Donald Trump's supporters and crackpots and complete psychopaths who had just an absolute divorce from reality were claiming that the language was ambiguous enough that, perhaps then Vice President Mike Pence, he could kind of, maybe there was some wiggle room and he could just decide which votes to count, and maybe he didn't like these votes because there was something fishy going on and he could just set them aside and take an alternate slate of electors. And again, the vast and overwhelming majority of both, right-wing and left-wing constitutional experts, legal scholars, et cetera, and so forth, said that that was absolute bullshit. As a matter of fact, most of Trump's own attorneys, his White House counsel, his attorney general, most people agreed that this notion is insane. It doesn't even, it shouldn't even be called a legal theory because there's nothing to it. But when you have a bad faith actor like Donald Trump, aided and abetted by other bad faith actors in the Republican Party, a lot of mischief can occur. And so the idea was to kind of shore up the language and also increase the thresholds. If you want to object or contest the results of an election, you can still do that, but they want to beef up the standard that you have to meet to do it. So the Electoral Count Reform Act would make it more difficult to contest electors at the joint session of Congress to certify presidential elections. This includes raising the threshold to force a vote on an electoral objection from one House member and one senator to a fifth of each chamber. This is huge because under the current law, literally, all you have to do to make a formal objection, you have to write it down, and then you have to get one person from each chamber of Congress to co-sign the objection. One member of the House, one member of the Senate. Now, again, historically speaking, this is pretty difficult and relatively rare. And then, of course, it has to go to the, has to be voted on by each chamber and passed with a simple majority, right? So nothing like that's ever occurred. We've had objections in the past, but they've all been defeated or shut down. This would raise a threshold. Now you can't just get one person from each chamber, especially the Republican Party, and we'll get into this. There are too many people who are just trigger happy to contest an election for no reason and to abuse this relatively low threshold, this relatively low standard. So the Electoral Count Reform Act increased it. Hey, you want to object to an election? You need to get 1/5 of each chamber to co-sign your objection. Then it's got to go to each chamber for a majority vote. So that's good. It also clarifies that the vice president's role in the counting is purely ceremonial. And I haven't read the language of the bill, but I imagine they are super explicit. The vice president literally has no discretion to choose what votes to count and what votes to not count. Literally doesn't have a choice. If he or she even thinks that they have a choice, they should, flagellate themselves because they absolutely have no choice whatsoever. I mean, I don't know how specific they have to break it down in order to make it abundantly clear to everybody that, like, literally you open every single envelope. You don't get a choice. You can't skip one. You have to read what's written on the envelope. You can't add words. You can't substitute words. You have to put the envelope as it'll be interesting to see how like crazy explicit it has to be so that the next time the Republicans try this, they can go, no, seriously, we've Republican proofed this. It says it right here. Requiring Congress to accept electors sent by governors to crack down on the ability of other state officials to send competing electoral slates. Because, again, that was another part of the Trump MAGA scheme to overturn the results of the election. It wasn't just the riot at the Capitol, the attempted insurrection. This coup was very complex, and there were multiple legal theories floated, not just Vice President Pence just disregarding votes that, he found suspicious or claimed to be suspicious, but also that governors in red states that or Republican governors of states, which could be blue states or red states. We have a couple of Republican governors, I think, in predominantly blue states, but that they would just send a different slate of electors. Like, hey, look, I know Biden won this state, but we can get some people to say that Trump did, and I'll make them the electors, and they'll go to D.C. So this will require Congress to accept electors, sent by governors instead of, basically precluding the idea that bad faith actors can send alternative slates for consideration. It would also include a measure aimed at addressing flaws in the process of transitioning from one presidential election to another, a response to the GSA, the General Services Administration 3-week delay in providing transition resources to Biden. This was huge, right? This was also unprecedented because the GSA is the federal agency, responsible for providing funding for the transition as well as intelligence and reports and everything else, because it's called a transition for a reason, right? It's not a hard stop. In order for the incoming president to understand what's going on and be able to hit the ground running, so to speak, that transition of funds and intelligence and communication, that's paramount. And there was a 3-week delay at the height of COVID, right? We have credible reason to believe that transition made it more difficult for the Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration, to, get a handle on the vaccine rollout and things like that. Like those 3 weeks matter, right? As well as intelligence about, the ongoing retrograde forces in Afghanistan, per the Doha Agreement. So that 3-week delay is pretty significant. It's good that the Electoral Count Act intends to address that. It says it will allow multiple candidates to receive transition resources when there isn't a clear winner, even though there was in 2020, while requiring the GSA to ascertain the winner of the Electoral College. And it would also require the person running the GSA to provide reports to Congress and candidates on the transition, as well as a public written opinion justifying decisions. So that's good. It's a solid step in the right direction. It had broad bipartisan support. There's no way to foolproof, again, our system of government. That's something that's a recurring theme of my videos when we discuss this. If you have bad faith actors in positions of power, they can get very creative with language, and they can, we've just seen this before. People can be pedantic, people can be semantic, people can interpret things wildly out of proportion. So you can't Republican-proof your government. You can't bad faith-proof your government. But you can make it more difficult, I guess, for them to act in bad faith. And I think this does. So glad it passed. And yeah, hopefully it achieves its goal and we'll never see anything like January 6th ever again. Hey, you. Yeah, you. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, and I hope that you did, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe. Also, my link tree is in the description below, so if you have a sec, go ahead and share the love on all my social media accounts. Also, if you want to express an opinion, eternal devotion, or undying contempt, go ahead and leave a comment because we're always looking for feedback. And on that note, I look forward to pondering politics and pop culture again with you very soon.